Welcome everyone to the Robert Cocuzzo in Conversation with Jan Saragoni event hosted by Belmont Books. I am Emma. I am a bookseller at Belmont Books located in Belmont, Massachusetts. So like Jan just so happily said, we are currently open for browsing every day except Monday and Sunday. From 2 until 6, so you can come on in and take a quick look. So some events coming up. Next week we have a Jane Yolen launch of her book with Heidi Semple and Sam Streed. And then the very next day, we have Carrie Arsenault in conversation with Elizabeth Rush. And so you can sign up for those events or any others at belmontbooks.com, and we have an events calendar and you can see everything, and it's all in one place and it's all very nice. So we just ask that you keep your cameras off just so we're not distracted, just so we don't interrupt Rob and Jan while they're talking. Of course, if Rob and Jan want to see your lovely faces, that's fine too. But just to keep things streamlined. So in the last 10 years, Robert Cocuzzo has served as the editor of N Magazine, a seasonal lifestyle publication based on the island of Nantucket, where he is currently, as I just learned. During that time, he has authored 2 critically acclaimed books, Tracking the Wild Coomba, The Life of Legendary skier Doug Coombs, and The Road to San Donato, Father, Son, and Cycling Across Italy. He has also contributed to a number of publications, including Departures, Esquire, Outside, and Luxury. And then Jan Saragoni, I'm so sorry, I'm butchering names.
Names are so hard.
Well, I have an Italian name as well, so I get it. I'm just bad at it. She founded her public relations and public affairs company more than 20 years ago, gathering an enviable roster of clients in the arts, business, hospitality, publishing, and development sectors. A graduate of the Kennedy School of Government, Jan hosts the Harvard Club of Boston's now online speaker series. She's a chair of the Board of Trustees of Massachusetts College of Art and Design. So now, if you have any questions for our lovely authors, you can drop them in the chat and I will come back later and read said questions aloud. And then, without further ado, I will disappear and it'll be over to Jan and Rob. So take it away.
Thank you, Emma. What a delight to be here. And how wonderful to see so many faces and know that others are there. I think most of us know that The Road to San Donato is this breathtaking account of a 500-mile father-son bike ride from sort of rural Tuscany all the way down the peninsula through Rome to the ancestral homeland of San Donato. There are all kinds of adventures and misadventures that happen in between, things that just make my skin crawl when I was reading about the flat tires and the Airbnbs that were slightly less than idyllic. Also thinking about how wonderful to do a bike ride through the peninsula of Italy, and so many thoughts about this, and how most of us, when we take these overseas trips, we are renting a house someplace and staying in one place, but that's not what Rob and his father Stephen did. And I think that at a time when most of us are instead of saying, what are we doing today, where are we going, we're saying, what are we watching tonight on TV? To read a travel book, which really, in many ways, Rob, I'm going to ask you to jump in a second on this particular point, is sure, it's a travel book about Italy and about the adventures and a trip to the ancestral home, but it's also a story about relationships. and father-son relationships and intergenerational relationships. So I'm just going to start by saying, Rob, if you were to do the trip again, and you might, knowing your stamina and your sense of adventure, who would you bring if not your father? Oops, I think we've lost.
I just saw that.
Okay.
I just saw him like flip out. I think oh, there he is. He's back.
Muted. I think he's muted.
Yeah, let me, all right, I'm unmuting you more. You should be able to start your video now, Rob. Why, this is just silly. I'm trying to unmute him and nothing is happening.
It's funny, I see that. I think everybody's muted. I see that microphone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the guests are supposed to be muted so they don't interrupt.
Oh, okay.
But it's very funny that one of our authors has been. Oh.
Okay, you got me?
Yes, you're here.
We're back?
Welcome back.
Oh!
Wow.
Wow. 20 minutes working out the thing.
You probably got my long-winded question already, but you brought you and your father together were on this incredible trip. If and when you do it again,
I got the question. Thank you, Jen. I want to say just to start that I'm so flattered that you would do this with me because I remember really early on in my career having dinner with you. I met on Newbury Street and just how encouraging you were. And I remember telling you just about this idea, and your support back then meant so much to me. And so to be in conversation with you is just this kind of full circle experience that I'm just incredibly grateful. So I want to say that off the top. Really appreciative. But my answer to the question that you posed, I think is a great one, is I would definitely go with my wife and my little baby Vienna. And we actually have a chariot scenario going with bikes where we could pop her in the back. And then Jenny is, without a doubt, the best athlete that I know of, natural athlete. So I think we would really we would do a good job. In fact, when I was doing the research for the book, Jenny and I went back to the village, and Jenny was 7 months pregnant. And so Vienna has technically been to San Donato already. And we were actually saying that to her last night. So I have a big dream of one day writing a book where we bring Vienna to some of the places that we've traveled together and kind of tell her the stories of those places, and also just as a testament of how they've changed. I think that would be very interesting. So that's a book that I definitely want to write in the future, is this kind of family adventure and all the misadventures that would come with that.
And for those who haven't had the great opportunity to read this just incredible book, I've read it twice now, and I go back to it often. You and your father, I think, inspired in large part by your grandfather, a conversation with your grandfather, whose father came from this village of San Donato, where many Italian immigrants had emigrated from to Brighton,
right,
in Boston, and you realized he hadn't been there. Your grandfather had not been back, and was sort of at the end of his life wondering, gee, I probably should have done that. And that, am I relating this correctly, that sparked in you this desire to?
Absolutely. I vividly remember that interaction with my grandfather. We were sitting in his house in the Cape. My grandparents lived in this little cottage in the Cape. And it was pretty clear that he was in the final stretch of his life. And he was a true patriarch, a real man's man, but a gentle giant all the same. And I watched his stamina, his strength kind of dwindle very quickly. And I realized when he had shared to me that he'd never been to the village, that he never would go to the village. And although that seemed like such a fundamental truth, in that moment, it just crystallized how time goes by so quickly. And it's interesting because my wife Jenny and I were talking last night. Actually, I'm sorry, it was today. When you have a kid, like, the days feel like they're a week long. So earlier today, we were talking, and I was going through old photos of the trip, and I said to her, I'm so glad that we did this, my dad and I. And it's become even more clear now where, just like you said off the beginning, we can't travel. For a long time, we couldn't spend time with family. And so to have this chunk of time with my dad, I cherish. And, and to go through the book again today, which I'm grateful for the opportunity to be prompted to do that, all over, I was just really appreciative of that.
And it was, I'd like you to be my tour guide for any place I choose to go. You were just a marvel of organization. Here you were, again, listeners, on bicycles, not motorbikes, but bicycles, going all the way down. And you were the one who found the places to stay and places to go and places to eat, and you knew where to go when flat tires happened and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're giving me more credit than I deserve for the organization aspect, because as I was reflecting on the trip, I have this mentality where if you just set the plan and you proceed with it, the net will appear for you and you'll be able to figure out as you go. But there were circumstances that presented themselves that, for those who've read the book, that we didn't immediately know how to navigate. And I myself didn't know how to navigate. And it actually turned out that my dad became the big hero to rectify the situation. But it was interesting because my dad wasn't the most travel savvy person. And so, as anyone knows, when you go abroad, you need to adopt this new level of patience that you didn't have in your former life. And so there's going to be all these circumstances that occur that you're going to have to summon that resiliency, that patience. And my dad quickly adopted that. But there was also that period of time where, he kind of had to free himself from his former identity and realize that, we're here not for A to B, we're here from everything in between. And when we changed our mentality in that way, it turned out to be this incredible experience, not only just in experiencing Italy and seeing the countryside, but also gave us an opportunity to have a conversation that had eluded us for the, 30 years that we knew one another. So it was, and that's what travel can do,
In your case, it really did. I'm looking for one of the quotes I love the best. You end each chapter with a very thought-provoking quote, and one of them that I was thinking about is, travel is all about uncertainty. And I forget who said that, but that really set the stage for what you and your father did. But
oh, yeah.
but if you would just go back to the beginning of the trip, and I would like to go back to what you just said about things you learned about father, but
sure.
You started off in Florence. Is that where you landed?
Yeah, we landed in Florence, and we had I'd reached out to a cycling guide who was kind enough to give us a loose kind of itinerary of where to go, where to stay, just general ideas. And to answer the first question that just came out, neither of us spoke Italian, which it definitely added a wrinkle to it. But they speak, excellent English there, and I wish I had done more to prepare myself linguistically. But we started in Florence, and the decision that we had to make in the beginning, as far as logistics, was whether we were going to bring a lot of things and have to load our bikes up and it'd be a big affair moving it all around, or would we go very, very minimal? And my dad loves simplicity. Like, that's one of his cornerstone of his ethos is, simple life is the best life. And so the idea of going simple was what we chose. We both had backpacks that were size of like 2 calzones put together. And we had our cycling clothes, and then we had our street clothes. And we each had these little shoes that we hung off the backs of our backpacks. And that was it. We just had that and a credit card and some cash. And it really was, for the first part where we weren't like destroying our clothes, it was nice to be that simple. You know, by the time we got to the village, it would have been nice to have some, you know, other clothing.
What surprised you about Italy?
Well,
What surprised you about Florence or Rome or Siena?
what surprised me about Rome was how much I disliked it. And it was because we just come from days cycling through the countryside where we were just in these rolling, sublime green hills. And, you know, for those that cycle or do any type of endurance sport, there's just this moving meditation that happens. And when you're in the landscape like that, I remember going through and thinking that it was like we were in this painting, you know, just like pedaling through a painting. And it was euphoric. You just kind of filled with the endorphins and all that. So then when you arrived to Rome, it was like every car was out to kill us. You know, we'd kind of nose our way to the rotary, and you just, you know, the motorcycles and the Vespas and everything, all the horns are going. So we had kind of thought we were going to show up at Rome, the Pope's going to be there like to, you know, bless us. And in reality, we're like, we got to get out of Rome as quickly as possible. So that's what struck me about Rome. But I mean, obviously the underlying history that we ended up dredging up was probably what I found most surprising. And I'm sure we'll touch upon it later in the discussion. But, you know, the World War II history that I was pretty unfamiliar with, I knew loosely. But as we started cycling through some of these places, it became more clear to me. And then obviously when we got to our ancestral village, it culminated in a very dramatic way that really was the motivation for writing this book, because I had no intention. This is a question I get, I think it's a good one. I had no intention on writing this book.
Right.
You know, my dad had sent me he called me up. He doesn't send texts. I was going to say he sent me a text, but my dad's probably sent like 10 texts in his life. So he called me up and he said, I have the idea for your next book. And the original idea was to cycle across the United States. And then it morphed into this adventure. But during that trip, I didn't think that there was much to write about for a book. And when we got to the village, we discovered its history. We felt our own personal connection to this place. I remember calling up my wife and saying, it was my girlfriend at the time, and I said, you know, this is it. This is the next book. And then I started writing on a plane ride home.
It's that history that you weave so skillfully into your personal journey, which really positioned you and your father not as tourists, but really as travelers through Italy. But the World War II history is fascinating. You delved into that from a particular standpoint, meaning the fascist occupation and the Nazi occupation of Italy, and
Right.
the subsequent persecution of the Jews and stripping away of their right to own a business. And the revelation, I think people who have not been to Italy or don't have the background that you do think of Italy as really a Christian Gentile country, and are often surprised to know that some of the most beautiful synagogues in the world, the one in Florence is just magnificent. The Roman ghetto, the word ghetto actually, I believe, comes from, it's an Italian word that comes from the section of the city where the Jews were.
Yes.
So
Yep.
there was and is, despite the annihilation, or the attempted total annihilation of Italy's Jewish community, there's still a very vibrant Jewish community in Italy. And in San Donato in particular, something very special happened during that time. Can you talk about that and what you found out about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to touch upon what you said, because I think it's such a really worthy point to reiterate, is that it has a rich Jewish heritage in Italy, which I was completely ignorant to, quite frankly, until I started reading about it, started going to some of those synagogues. We went to a beautiful synagogue in Florence. I think I believe it's the oldest synagogue in Italy, but I might be mistaken. It was, either way, it was one of the most historic. And learning about it was interesting, the Jewish population within Italy had this kind of seesaw experience where they were given freedoms, they were given rights, they were given liberties, and then they were revoked and sent to the ghettos. And it was repeated over and over and over, to the point where you get the rise of Mussolini, and then you've got the racial laws, and then you have the subjugation and the internment of foreign Jews. They're basically the same that Hitler was doing. They're loading up and putting them in internment camps. And a lot of these internment camps were in the mountains and these kind of remote outposts, and one of which was San Donato. And so there were a number of Jews that were interned foreign Jews that were interned in this village where our family's from. And they had a pretty remarkable experience there, in which when the Nazis came to occupy Italy, they came to all these villages to get the Jews that were interned there by the fascists. And when they came to San Donato, a lot of them weren't there to be found, because the villagers had bound together to hide them or give them false identifications or smuggle them into the mountains. And so when I discovered that history when we were there, I was absolutely blown away, because I'd been piecing together just the history of Jews within Italy, and then to get to this place where I'm connected to and learn about, what the people did and didn't do, because they weren't all good. There were members of the village that were also sympathizers that gave people up. It was really kind of put a burning curiosity in my mind, and quite frankly, it was an anxiety as well when I learned about the fact that there were sympathizers that outed people, and I questioned. I thought, well, what role did my family have? And so that set off a whole adventure unto itself. And I had the great good fortune and privilege to actually interview some of the people that acted so heroically, which was a treat.
And San Donato was so distinguished in that respect that the government of Israel actually conferred that honor on them. And remind me of the title of that. I forget.
Yeah, it's the. So funny. I knew you were going to ask me that. It's I forgive me for forgetting at this moment.
But also, I mean, we think of brave individuals who endangered their own lives to help hide Jews. We think about Holland and Anne Frank and the Dutch. We haven't really thought about the Italians. And you were able to, although those of us who have, as I do, family who were in Italy during World War II and actually were part of a resistance movement. I also had a father in the Italian Navy, which was, fighting under Mussolini. But you had the incredible experience of actually meeting a woman, Carolina Cardarelli, is that right? Who sat and forged documents and helped give new identity to you, saving so many lives in the process?
Yeah, so there's actually two women that I write about. The one that I met, her name was Pasqualina. And she was 18 years old during the occupation, and she found herself in a position to forge identification. She was basically in what was known as the House of the Fascists, and that was the town office. And she basically had a skill set to be able to write up these IDs. And the Jews that were in the village, a number of them came to her asking for her to do this. And it was a tremendous risk to her life, because the Nazis did find out about this, and they actually pulled her whole family out of her house and threatened to shoot them. And by the grace of God, she wasn't obviously killed. And so when I met her, she was in this little, it was like the Italian version of a 5 and dime. It was just this kind of like odds and ends shop, and it was this dusty old little place. And she was sitting there with this little Bible and these little kind of saint figurines, and I had this chance to have this wonderful conversation to her. And I think it's important for me to say that the reason why I gained access to her is from a woman named Delia Raffo, who I know you know, which became my kind of historical liaison throughout this whole experience. And she really is, I think, a key character in this whole thing. It never would have happened had we not met her. And I'll just quickly tell the story how we came to get in touch with her. We showed up to the village after this arduous, long cycling adventure. And we didn't know anyone in town. We showed up and we see the monument and we see our name carved in the granite. And we're both just, tears in our eyes,
And excuse me for one second, I just want to establish that you arrived unannounced. Is that right? In San Donato, you hadn't called anybody. You just were these two guys on bikes arriving.
Yeah, we showed up, and my dad looked similar to me, long hair. At this point, we both dropped probably about 10 pounds over the course of the ride. So our cycling clothes just hanging on our bones. And we have this weepy reception where we're looking at this monument. We're both in tears. We're hugging one another. And we look over, and there's these two old Italian guys playing cards, just like, what are these people doing here? You know?
I mean, he was on a special casting out of a movie. It just looked.
Oh my gosh, it was the best. I mean, they're just figures. I mean, they were just characters that you'd want to be there, you know, seated kind of perfectly, playing cards, smoking cigarettes. And so we sat and had a coffee, and my dad had known Delia from childhood, from Brighton, and he knew that she had moved back to the village and was kind of back and forth at this point. And he mentioned her to the coffee barista, and sure enough, the barista called her, and Delia comes screeching up to us. And like from that point forward, we were just kind of following her around. And she opened this place up. It never would have opened up to us like it did without her. So we were really, really grateful. And so she actually worked there as a social worker and came to know all these individuals because she went in and took care of them. And so she knew Pasqualina, she knew her story, and was kind enough to bring me to meet her. And it was something that, I mean, I've interviewed hundreds of people at this point in my career, and it was one where I just, you know, it was like you're in front of a saint. You're in front of someone that's a very truly rare breed, and mustered a superhuman heroism despite being, and I don't mean, when I say she's a simple person, I don't mean it in a derogatory way. I just mean that she lived a simple life and yet had such an impact, a profound impact on other people. And I thought, you know, that's such a lesson for all of us to learn. I think that when we look at life, it can seem so daunting and so overwhelming and so like just bigger than us. But in reality, there are opportunities to make an impact. And this woman, you know, she'd been in this little five and dime for years without talking to anyone who would share her story. And so to be able to actually talk to her and ask her questions, and it was also incredibly intimidating, because what do you ask someone who, you know, did that, and you're meeting her for the first time, you know, and she's 91 years old.
What surprised you either pleasantly or unpleasantly about the town? Putting aside all these incredible characters and the history you learned, just the actual texture and feeling and look of the village and the people you met. Were you just delighted? Were you disappointed?
Yeah.
Something in between? What was that?
You know, that is such a good question, because I remember telling my dad as we were riding to the village after this epic journey to get there, I said, what if we get to the village? I don't actually, maybe I just thought this, I didn't say this to him because I didn't want to sour his taste buds. But I thought to myself, what if we get to the village and it's full of a bunch of assholes? Like, get there and it's like these terrible human beings, and, you know, this fabled journey ends in such a, you know, unfortunate circumstance. But it could have been further from what we experienced. For those that have gone back to their ancestral, you know, homelands or whatever, where they're kind of their family tree began. My experience was you have this molecular connection that fires within you when you're walking amidst this history, when you're going past the household that, you know, your great grandfather was running around as a kid. And whether it was my mind doing that to me, I felt a deep connection to the place. And that sensation, that sentiment, was only enhanced by the fact that there was this just gorgeous little village. I mean, biblically old, all stone, wedged into the mountain. I mean, just really enchanting place. And that enchantment just carried us through the whole experience. And I think what it did for both my dad and I, who I think we're both kind of introverted people, not one to like reach out and want to go meet this person, go meet that person. We really took it upon ourselves. We thought this is an opportunity to reconnect with family that we never met. And sure enough, like you see in the movies, just people coming out of the woodwork to greet us and took us in for food. They wanted to cook us meals. Like, the whole thing was really unbelievable. I mean, within hours of being there, it was our family kind of flowing out to receive us. And so I don't, you know, as far as negatives, I can't think of anything except when we got there, we didn't have a place to stay. And so Delia had asked one of our cousins, you know, if they knew of a place. And he said, well, I know I have a key to this inn here, this bed and breakfast. And there's a price for with heat, or there's a price without heat. my dad and I guess you could say, but more my dad, like pride ourselves in the ability to save some money. It's like, oh, we'll just do the no heat price. And it was so frigid cold in this like stone place. And all we had was our one outfits. So we were going to bed with like our cycling gear on, and then our street clothes on, and then whatever blankets we could squirrel up from the place. But that was it. I mean, other than that, it was I would love to live there. I'm sure my wife wouldn't let us, but I would love to.
What time of year were you there?
We were there in March,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm not mistaken. I hope I'm right on that.
Rob, as I read your book twice, actually, I thought about my own trip to Italy with my father. He was born in Lucca, up in Tuscany, but grew up in Genoa and Liguria. Left, literally, jumped ship in Boston in 1949, got a job as a waiter at the Ritz-Carlton, and never went back to Italy. Never went back. His mother would come here every summer. His cousins would come. My mother was American, not an ounce of Italian blood, but as you know, the Italian blood and influence takes over, especially when the father right off the boat, as we used to say. But he never would talk about Italy. It was always, that was then and this is now. And when his mother, who was too old to come anymore in the summer, was near death. Actually, she was near death about 5 times. It was very dramatic. I would go over there just to be. But I said, Dad, we really should go back. No, I don't want to go back. And it turned out one of the reasons he didn't go back was because he had jumped ship. His passport had expired in 1950. So we had to go through all this rigmarole of getting him an Italian passport and then getting him out of the country into the country. But that sort of fun adventure aside, I learned more about my father traveling with him in Italy, just Dad and me, than I think I did, and I was probably 45 when we took that trip, and I did in 45 years. The emotions and memories of not just specific places and people, but intergenerational relations and how certain things that certain ways he learned to relate to his family, his kids, his wife, for better or worse. He saw the way his father and grandfather related to women in their life. And I know that's something that you and your father talked about, that intergenerational passing on of ways of engaging with people you love. Can you talk a bit about that? And
Yeah.
In your eyes?
Yeah, no, that's, as I said, when we were talking earlier, it's such a blessing that you had a chance to do that with your father. To have that is it occurs to me now, thinking about my own experience with my dad, how rare it is, and it is a blessing. But yeah, exactly to your point. There is this generational kind of cause and effect that I came to realize more clearly when we traced our family history back to this place. And it's even more point in my mind now, thinking that I'm a father and what am I going to be passing on? But like what I recognized from my great grandfather to my grandfather to my grandfather to my dad was, my great grandfather didn't treat my grandfather all that well, and so when my grandfather had my dad and his siblings, he treated them exceptionally well and kind of showered them in love and put them in this this really just cocoon of love. But I think my father would say this, one of my grandfather's maybe shortcomings, maybe as a dad, was that he didn't necessarily support my dad's education. Mm-hmm. And so when my dad had me, he and my mom just like that was going to be, they were always going to have my back. Whatever college we got into, they were going to pay for. That was always a really important thing for them. So then I look at, well, what's the cause and effect that I'm going to do for my child? Mm-hmm. And I just think that what it made me realize as we're doing this trip is that you don't think about it all that much. I don't think you think about, there's so much that we assume of the people that we're closest to. And I don't know if this was the experience you had with your father, but when we're with someone our whole lives, we just assume that we know their history. But in reality, very rarely do you actually ask them, well, why did they do this? Or why did they do that? What inspires them? What motivates them? And in the course of this ride, my dad and I had an opportunity to have a pretty candid discussion about those things. And it even came into more full bloom after the ride, where we'd already kind of opened the floodgates, and I was actually able to have a more candid discussion that made its way into the book. So, the reason I wrote the book in a lot of ways was that I was hoping to prompt readers to initiate that conversation, because you realize that when that person's gone, there's no reclaiming any of that information. When I was writing the chapters about my grandfather, he had passed away by that point. And all these stories that I heard from him growing up that were so vivid in my mind, when it came to actually putting them to the page, were completely vanished. Mm-hmm. And so we really need to spend the time to ask the questions that we think we're going to have the time for, because the door can close pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. And when you're traveling, it really presents that opportunity. But I don't think it's exclusive to traveling. I think that you just need to go in it with attention. You need to really just initiate it, because more often than not, that person is going to want to either engage you in that way. You just got to create the opening.
Right. How has your relationship with your father changed since you came back?
We haven't talked. We don't talk anymore. No,
that did it.
That was it. We went our separate ways. He flew, I flew, and we were. No, we're. It's been great. I mean, he's a grandfather now, and so it's amazing to watch him in that role with my mother. And I mean, we've always had, as you kind of get in the book, we always had a unique relationship. We were always friends, and I think that maybe that friend role was somewhat of a challenge for me, where there was times where I was just looking for the traditional father figure, and now
he was not a traditional father figure, Stephen.
No, I don't think there's anything traditional about him whatsoever. I mean, and that's part of his mystique. I mean, he's such a unique individual, and that was, I look at that now as a tremendous gift to me, because it basically gave me the license to be who I wanted to be, mm-hmm. and not feel like I needed to fill any particular mold. But when I was growing up, it was almost like to put your foot on the gas towards not being in a mold, and that's certainly the way he's lived his life. But our relationship's tremendous. I mean, again, I feel very grateful. And we both, even when the Tour de France is on right now, and he's watching it, and he sent me a text message the other day, just saying like, it's reminding me of our ride, and I said to him, I was so glad that you're getting to do it. And so we're both very appreciative to have made that effort. And an interesting side story was that, it's amazing how one decision can lead to the next. He and my mom ended up going on a trip to Ireland, where she's from, and rented bikes and pedaled around the Irish coast, and it was, it just opened this whole other thing for them too. So
did Stephen say where the food was better, Ireland or Italy? Just kidding. I think we know what he said. That sounds like a fun trip, though. We've got some questions. I can actually see them.
Oh, cool.
So I'm gonna start with one. Fun one. Rob, did you guys ever stop for gelato? And if so, what was your favorite flavor?
That's a great question. And I have to admit that we did not stop for gelato. We ate a lot of pasta and pizza and cannolis and stuff like that. So I didn't have any gelato, but I'm not in terms of flavors, anything that's cold will work with me. I'm just like sweet. So I'm sorry to say that I can't give you the gelato report.
A new book. Are you working on a new book? This is from a big fan.
Yeah, it's no. I mean, the short answer is no. I'm working on a bunch of other projects, and I can feel myself being prepared to write my next book. The book experience is it's a weird one, quite frankly. It's you pour yourself into something. Even before you pour yourself into something, you're searching and you're starting something, and then you're stopping it. You're starting, you try to vet it. You need to do something that you're going to willingly give yourself over to. Mm-hmm. And you need to, I think you do need to have that kind of experience that lights that passion but then you write the book, you kind of devote yourself to it, and then comes the marketing part of it, which I think is my experience is the hardest part of the whole thing. It's a really, and for writers who like to be in kind of self-contained areas and be focusing on one thing, to be out and about and talking about it and like pleading with people to buy it, it can be somewhat soul-sucking. And so I'm still working on getting better at that part of it, just becoming more comfortable with it. So I have to admit that I'm waiting for myself to feel like, okay, I'm ready to engage that process again and feel good about, putting the story together. But I know that the next book is not going to be anywhere near as personal as this book. Because I think that made it all the more taxing. It's just writing, and then I try to write as candidly as possible and honestly as possible, with also trying to protect the people that you love most. And you ask yourself, like, what's the point of putting this out there? Like, why? There's certain parts of the book for both of my dad and I that I think are pretty personal that we wouldn't necessarily share with others. And so suddenly you get all these people reading about you. And it's been a unique experience for my dad because he was actually selling the books out of his hair salon.
That's great.
And so people are like reading the book while he's like cutting their hair, and he's, they're reading about him. And so I just think that I'll probably write something not quite as personal the next one.
Here's another question. Have you heard from any of the people you met and talked about in the book? What was their reaction?
Yeah, so Delia has become a great family friend of ours. I love her to bits. She's just the best. I mean, she's the best. I mean, she's the most entertaining, most warm, loving woman I know. I mean, she's constantly just gets you on the move. So we've stayed in touch. We've had dinner with her and her partner. We went and actually, when we went back to Italy, we spent a lot of time with her. So I stay in touch with her, and then her brother Sergio, who's connected to the village, who I know you know, really close family friends. And then also my extended family that live still in the village. So a bunch of Cocuzzos that live there. We stay in touch on Facebook, and no one wants me dead. So I think the reaction was okay. I think the person that I was the two people I was most concerned about was Delia and my dad. And my mom. Those are the three people that I just wanted them to be okay with it. So those three people were the first people to read the book. And then, once I kind of got their blessing, it was fine.
Another question is, did you do rides to the surrounding towns of San Donato, maybe Forca d'Acero or to Opie?
We did go to Opie.
Did you go to Opie?
Oh, yeah. It was an amazing trip because we met one of our cousins there. Cousins, like loose. We don't know how connected we actually are, but he was this, so his name, Fulvio Cocuzzo. And he was, as I write in the book, I mean, just a unbelievable person to meet there, because he was this brilliant, like a professor, worked in theater, but he was also the only cyclist. It was like San Donato cycling team. He was the only member. And so he took us on these wonderful rides into the mountains, and he would be singing. He didn't speak a word of English. So we were having to figure out a way to communicate. And he ended up being a great interview I did through a translator later on. But we did cycle around the area. It's beautiful.
And a follow-up to this question is, this person Sophia, she's interested in finding out about her family's involvement during World War II in San Donato. How did you do, what would a good resource for her be in terms of research?
Oh, sure. So there's a number of great books that are written that you can, they're pretty easy to Google, because there was a database made of all the Jews that were interned in Italy. And one particular writer put those all together, and I'm sorry that her name is escaping me at this very moment, but it's an easy.
Pizzuti. Is it Pizzuti? Yes.
Pizzuti. Thank you very much. Thank you. I knew you'd have that. Yes. Pizzuti. She wrote a beautiful collection of their stories, and so that became a good database for it. And then also there's some great archives within San Donato that
Catherine asks, or says that she met you last year at Dreamland before she and her husband visited San Donato. They were there in October of 2019. And she writes that she too became very emotional upon arriving there. She wants to thank you for writing your book because she would not have paid so much attention to the World War II connection. Did you visit Monte Cassino, she asked.
Yes, we did.
Think about it.
Yeah, we cycled through there. There's a beautiful monastery there in the mountains there, the hills there. But we did, because we left from Monte Cassino, so we cycled to Monte Cassino from San Donato, and it's funny because the whole route there was kind of on a highway, so we're on this skinny little side road, people were zipping by us. But we did go to Monte Cassino, which is an incredible place because it was basically bombed to smithereens by the Allies, except that monastery.
Except for that one. And here's a question. Somebody had asked earlier if either of you speak Italian. I think your answer was no, but you sprinkled some phrases.
My dad, we picked up a few things. I think what was really fun to watch was my dad's, just the evolution of not wanting to attempt any Italian and then becoming, pretty eager to give it a shot. And by the time that we left, he was grazie mille. He was just, gesticulating, and he was great. But that was one of my regrets, because I made the intention on trying to learn the language before I left, and just life got in the way, sadly. So
I was going to become fluent in Greek at the beginning of the pandemic, and that hasn't happened yet. It's so many shows on TV to watch. You can't learn another language. We have a question from another esteemed author, Meredith Goldstein, asks.
Oh my gosh!
I know. Can you believe? Hi, Meredith. She wants to know. Do you find yourself escaping in fiction or nonfiction during this time? And has the pandemic changed your reading habits?
That's such a great. Wow! First of all, getting a question from Meredith Goldstein first it's Jan, and now. Yeah, I'm definitely a nonfiction person still. So I haven't escaped into fiction, to be honest with you. Part of it is that I hate to admit this, but my reading is usually motivated by my writing, and I'm always trying to kind of fine tune my skill set. And so for me, I'm always sticking with nonfiction, which I know I need to kind of break out of. But it's just the rhythm I'm kind of in at the moment.
Here's a question from a very let's see. Now I'll go. Have you from Greg Stone, himself, another esteemed author and journalist? He wants to know: would you ever consider moving to Italy? And the follow-up question from his equally accomplished wife is, or recommend it. So, would you move there? And if you did, would you recommend it?
Well, I think by November I might be moving there, depending on certain things that occur, but I'll save that for another discussion. No, I would actually, when we were there, we were actually looking at some of the properties that were in the village. And Jenny and I had this dream of living in Florence at some point in time. I think we both love that city. So we really, before the pandemic, we were actually just really fantasizing about living abroad at some point, and we still have that dream. But I would love to be in Italy, Florence, or the village would certainly be a place of great isolation. But I thrive in isolation, so I could see myself being good there.
There are a lot of questions that I've had from friends, and I'm sure you have too, and we have them here tonight. Wouldn't it be wonderful even if we wanted to go to Italy or anywhere in the Eurozone, we can't. Americans cannot enter the Eurozone, and even those of us with European passports, I've got an Italian one, if you are a US resident, you can't enter the Eurozone. So with any luck, there'll be many changes coming about, both on the health and political front.
Yeah.
Gosh, we're even bad. Americans can't even go to the Bahamas, for crying out loud. We can't go anywhere, which is why people should read this book, because it will transport you to someplace else.
Yeah. No, it's so true. I mean, it is a very, I mean, suffocate. It feels for those that travel a lot. I mean, it feels like a suffocating time. You know, there's something about even the notion of being able to go somewhere, see something new, and not having that. You know, of course, there's places within the United States we can see, but you know, there's something incredibly fulfilling, and you find more about yourself when you're in a place that's completely foreign. You know, you definitely learn about your own resiliency, and you also remember how small you are. You know, and so I agree with you. I'm deeply optimistic. And truth be told, Jenny and I are like, all right, where can we go to? You know, like where will they take us? Because we're certainly itching.
Right, maybe Latvia, I'm not sure. We should do that should be a column. Where can we go? Those of us lucky enough to leave, what? Here's a question. Have you ever thought about getting an Italian passport?
Yeah, apparently it's, I just have to prove that I've got enough relatives there and draw the strong enough connection. I think I would love to have that, that ability to have a passport there. I have to look into it a little bit more, but Delia was explaining how she did it. And I know her brother Sergio had the opportunity, so I'd have to just triangulate and convince them that I have enough relatives there to draw the connection.
Or at least one who never became an American citizen. I think that's part of the equation. If you didn't, then you could. Now, what about on the Irish side? You could that might be a little easier, I think, to get an Irish passport. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I could look into it. I mean, I'm sure my mom would like that.
What was your mother's reaction to the book?
That's a great question. She was very supportive. I think that, interestingly enough, it was her story that was at the forefront, because it's, you know, it's her husband, it's her son, but she was incredibly supportive. And I've said this before, but the greatest blessing that I've had in this project was that when they read it, even before they read it, it was the idea that as long as it's true, it can go. Mm-hmm. In certain circumstances, you know, the truth is stranger than the fiction, but you know, it was incredibly empowering to have them in my corner. And honestly, they've always been in my corner. I mean, as any writer can attest, it's a lonely road in the beginning. It's still a lonely road. I mean, a writer is it's just a profession where you don't know where your next job is going to come from a lot of times. But when you're starting out and no one's reading any of your stuff, and you're just begging people to print your stuff and not even asking for a paycheck, you really need your fans. And my parents have been, in everything I've done, but especially in my writing career, have been tremendous fans of mine.
That certainly comes across, and the support putting you through BC High and Holy Cross and everything they did to make sure that you were launched in a way that was intellectually broad and without financial constraints. You were able to get
very
out. So speaking about fans, here's one named Ellen Charlone, Cocuzzo, who says that, you know, reading the book, Ellen couldn't help but think how much her father, your great uncle Danny, would have loved to talk to you about the trip. So she thanks you for writing about San Donato, and says it's given her family a chance to learn about where we all came from. That's quite.
Well, I greatly appreciate that, because Danny Cocuzzo was my grandfather's hero. He told me that Danny Cocuzzo deserves a book to be written about him, because he has a remarkable story of heroism during World War II. And in the last weeks of my grandfather's life, he told me that exact thing, was that, you know, the person that I respected and thought of my hero was his cousin Danny, who was, I mean, if I remember reading his obituary, just a remarkable human being. So I appreciate that compliment, and I would have loved to have the opportunity to just hear his stories. You know, I wouldn't even think about having him hear mine, because he lived 1,000 lives.
You know, we're coming toward the end of our hour, but I'm going to be selfish and just ask you, maybe it could be the final question, maybe we'll go on longer, but has it made you, how has your experience changed the way you look at some of the new immigrants who are coming to the States? You know,
So to the new,
the new immigrants.
Yeah.
There was a time it was really Italians and Jews and Irish, Russian Jews, German Jews, Irish, Chinese, and that mosaic has changed a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we need to not be so short-sighted. We need to remember, our history is so short in the course of time, and for some reason we've lost track of the fact that we are a country of immigrants. And when you go and track your own history back to wherever it may be, the experiences that they had, your ancestors, to get to where we are now, is not dissimilar to what so many individuals are encountering. The hardships on their face might look different, but it's the same desire, the same, wish for freedom and wish for opportunity that drove, my great-grandfather and his brothers over here, and I think we just need to remember that, because it's not, very few people can say this is ours, that we were here first. Like we've all been guests at some point, and we've all experienced persecution and alienation. And, it saddens me because there are certain, of every heritage, but, you do see sections of the Italian Americans that are, very anti-immigrant. And, it's concerning because you don't have to look that far back to draw the parallels. And so I think we just need to remember that. And the journey of going and following your roots to where they started, I think reinforces that truth that we all need to keep in the forefront of our minds.
I remember my father's relatives in Italy who stayed there were horrified that he had come to Boston because Sacco and Vanzetti was so burned in their memory, and they thought it was a dangerous place. All right, here's another question from Kathy, who wants to know, what is the greatest difference between this book and your previous book, Tracking the Wild Kingdom, besides that the first book you were on a solitary journey?
Yeah, it's a great question. The greatest difference would probably be, I was following the story of another person that I never met, and so that was just in terms of the writing technicality and trying to recreate the various experiences that made up his life, that was a challenge. That it's so interesting because I think books for an author, they really are a timestamp on a certain part of your life. Mm-hmm. And so when I look back at that book, it's a totally different head place that I was in. I was full on, extreme skier, bachelor, not bachelor, but I was, I didn't have a lot of tethers. I was living in remote mountain towns in Wyoming and France, and didn't have a lot of responsibilities. And as I was writing this book, this was kind of, the sunset of that life as I'm about to transition into becoming a parent. And I wrote The Road to San Donato in the 9 months that Jenny was pregnant. And so I'm reflecting on my relationship with my dad while I'm preparing to be a dad. And, I'm so grateful that I had that time, because I really looked at my dad with totally different eyes. We were the same age when we had our first child. And you realize like all the anxieties that come with that when you're waiting to have a kid. So yeah, one is like me being just totally no responsibilities, and then one is about to have all the responsibilities in the world like on my docket.
Baby Vienna turns 2. Is it tomorrow?
2, yeah. Tuesday.
Tuesday,
Wednesday or Tuesday, Wednesday, the 9th.
All the days are all the same now, aren't they?
I know they are. They totally are. But yeah, this book is dedicated to her, and she's been the delight of our lives. So.
Anything else you want to tell us about the book, or any other projects, or Italy, or San Donato, or?
Yeah, the only thing I guess I would leave everyone with is something I said earlier, which I just like to reiterate is we all have people in our lives that we want to know more about. And I would just encourage you after you get off this Zoom to kind of think of that person. It's not that hard to send them a text message or give them a call or shoot them an email and just initiate that. It doesn't have to be something big, but just a little push. They'll get that ball rolling, and I guarantee you're going to be really satisfied and fulfilled by doing that. And I know that we all have those people that on the sideburners of our brain. And so just go with a little.
That is a wonderful way to end this conversation. And Rob, thank you so much. And
Oh, thank you, Jen.
you get another book out sooner rather than later. You are a beautiful writer, a wonderful reporter and journalist, and
Oh, thank you.
best of luck in everything. Emma, anything we should say before we close out?
No, that was fabulous. Thank you both so much for being here, and what a wonderful conversation.
Well, it was
Thank you so much, Emma.
a privilege.
And thank you, Jen.
Thank you. All right. Stay safe, everybody.
Thanks,
Yeah,
everyone.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.